Today we're looking at the childhood inequality crisis, okay? The question is this: why do rich kids and poor kids live in completely different realities? And why does this permanently affect their brain development? Okay? We've done extensive research and discovered that class differences in childhood aren't just about material resources. This is system design that shapes neurological development itself. And this design is intentional. Most people think childhood inequality is about money. Rich kids have better toys, go to better schools, live in bigger houses. But that's not what this is about. This is about brain architecture. This is about how social class literally rewires children's neural development in ways that determine their cognitive abilities, emotional regulation, and future success. And we have the brain scans to prove it. Let me tell you what the latest neuroscience research reveals. Scientists at King's College London just published the largest study ever done on how inequality affects children's brains. They scanned over 10,000 children aged 9-10 across the United States. What they found should terrify any parent. Children growing up in states with higher income inequality showed measurable differences in brain structure and function. Not just different outcomes, different brains. The scans showed reduced cortical surface area and altered connections between brain regions in children from unequal societies. These aren't minor variations. These are structural changes in the areas responsible for emotion regulation, attention, and memory. And here's the critical part. These effects appeared in both wealthy and poor children living in unequal states. The inequality itself was toxic to developing brains. But this study is just the latest confirmation of what researchers have been discovering for years. At Washington University, scientists found that household and community poverty influence the brain's white matter tracts, which allow communication between brain regions. The children from poor families showed differences in the wiring of their brains that could be measured on MRI scans. Now, people hear this research and they think, well, this is about poverty. Poor families don't have the resources to stimulate their children properly. That's not wrong. But it's incomplete, because what we're actually seeing is a systematic segregation of childhood experiences that creates different species of human being. Let me explain what I mean. Rich children and poor children don't just have different amounts of money. They live in completely different cognitive and emotional environments from birth. And these environments literally shape how their brains develop. Rich children grow up in what researchers call high stimulation environments. From the moment they're born, they're surrounded by language-rich interactions. Their parents speak to them constantly, using complex vocabulary and complete sentences. They're read to every day. They're taken to museums, concerts, and educational activities. They have access to tutors, enrichment programs, and specialized interventions if they need them. But poor children grow up in what researchers call survival-focused environments. Their parents, often working multiple jobs or dealing with chronic stress, have less time for enriching interactions. The language they hear is simpler and less varied. They have fewer books, fewer educational toys, fewer opportunities for cognitive stimulation. Not because their parents care less, but because survival takes priority over enrichment. Now here's where it gets systematic. These differences in early experience create measurable differences in brain development. Rich children develop larger vocabularies, better executive functioning, and stronger emotional regulation. Poor children show higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which inhibits brain development. They develop what researchers call threat detection networks that are hyperactive, making it harder to focus on learning. And these differences compound over time. By age 4, rich children have heard 30 million more words than poor children. By the time they start school, the academic achievement gap is already established, and it never closes. The brain differences created in early childhood persist throughout life. But here's what most people don't understand. This system isn't just unfortunate, it's functional. The inequality in childhood development serves the economic system by creating different classes of workers. Rich children are being prepared for leadership, creativity, and decision-making roles. Poor children are being prepared for obedience, routine work, and following instructions. Look at how differently rich and poor children are educated. Rich children go to schools that emphasize critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving. They're encouraged to question authority, express their opinions, and develop their individual talents. They learn to see themselves as future leaders. Poor children go to schools that emphasize discipline, standardized testing, and rule following. They're taught to respect authority, memorize information, and suppress their individual instincts. They learn to see themselves as future workers. This isn't accidental. Different children are being prepared for different roles in the economic hierarchy, and the brain development differences ensure they'll be suited for those roles. Recent research from the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study shows that even when controlling for family income, children in more unequal states show altered brain development. This suggests that inequality itself, not just poverty, is toxic to developing brains. Children can sense the social hierarchy around them, and their brains adapt accordingly. Think about what this means. A child growing up in an unequal society learns at a neurological level where they fit in the social hierarchy. Their brain develops threat detection systems appropriate for their class position. Rich children develop confidence networks, poor children develop vigilance networks, and these differences become self-reinforcing. Rich children, with their enhanced cognitive abilities and emotional regulation, succeed in school and gain access to elite institutions. Poor children, with their survival-focused brain development, struggle academically and are channeled into vocational tracks. The education system then reinforces these differences. Rich children attend schools with small class sizes, individualized attention, and enrichment programs. Poor children attend overcrowded schools with overworked teachers and limited resources. The per-pupil spending difference can be thousands of dollars per year, even within the same district. But even when poor children perform well academically, they face additional barriers. Research shows that the returns to education are lower for children from poor backgrounds. A college degree provides less economic benefit to someone raised in poverty than to someone raised in wealth. This isn't because their education is lower quality. It's because they lack the social networks and cultural capital that turn credentials into career success. So we have a system where brain development, educational opportunities, and economic returns all favor children from wealthy families. And this system perpetuates itself across generations. The research on income inequality and brain development shows that this is accelerating. As societies become more unequal, the brain development gaps between rich and poor children increase. The children in the most unequal states show the largest differences in neural architecture. This has profound implications for mental health. Children whose brains develop in survival mode are at much higher risk for anxiety, depression, and behavioral problems. Not because they're defective, but because their brains have been shaped by an environment of scarcity and threat. And these mental health differences persist into adulthood. Adults who grew up in poverty show higher rates of mental illness, even after controlling for current income. Their brains were permanently altered by their childhood experiences. But here's the most disturbing part. This system presents itself as fair. We're told that education is the great equalizer, that any child can succeed if they work hard enough. But the neuroscience research shows this is a lie. Children from different social classes are literally developing different brains that give them different cognitive and emotional capabilities. So when we see differences in academic achievement, behavioral problems, or life outcomes between rich and poor children, we're not seeing differences in effort or character. We're seeing the results of systematic differences in brain development that begin in infancy. The education system then sorts children based on these neurological differences while pretending it's sorting them based on merit. Rich children with their enhanced cognitive abilities are placed in gifted programs and advanced classes. Poor children with their survival-focused brain development are placed in remedial programs and vocational tracks. This creates what researchers call educational apartheid. Children from different social classes attend different schools, follow different curricula, and receive different types of preparation for their adult roles. And because their brains have been shaped differently from birth, they perform differently in these educational environments. The result is a system that produces exactly the outcomes it's designed to produce. Rich children become rich adults, poor children become poor adults. And everyone believes this is natural and fair because the children seem to have different abilities and make different choices. But these aren't natural differences. They're manufactured differences created by systematic inequality in childhood development. The brain architecture that determines life outcomes is shaped by social conditions that could be changed. Research shows that interventions in early childhood can alter brain development. High-quality preschool programs, parent education, and poverty reduction can all improve cognitive and emotional development in poor children. Some studies show that giving families cash payments can literally change children's brain development. But these interventions remain small-scale and underfunded, because changing childhood development would threaten the class system that depends on these differences. If poor children develop the same cognitive and emotional capabilities as rich children, who would do the low-wage work that the economy depends on? The inequality in childhood development serves the economic system by ensuring a steady supply of workers suited for different roles. Rich children become the managers, professionals, and owners. Poor children become the service workers, manual laborers, and unemployed. And their different brain architectures make them suited for these different roles. This is why efforts to reform education focus on individual schools or teachers rather than addressing the underlying inequality in childhood development. Because changing test scores doesn't threaten the system. But changing brain development would. What we're witnessing is the biological encoding of social class. Rich and poor children are becoming different types of humans with different cognitive abilities, emotional regulation, and neural architectures. And this difference begins in infancy and persists throughout life. The implications are staggering. We're not just creating economic inequality. We're creating neurological inequality. We're producing human beings with different cognitive and emotional capabilities based on their social class position. And because this inequality is encoded in brain architecture, it becomes extremely difficult to overcome through individual effort. The poor child with an anxiety-prone, survival-focused brain cannot simply choose to develop the confidence and emotional regulation of the rich child. Their neural architecture makes certain outcomes much more likely than others. This research reveals that the American dream of meritocracy is neurologically impossible under current conditions. Merit itself is a product of brain development, and brain development is a product of social class. What we call merit is actually the expression of class privilege encoded in neural architecture. The children we label as gifted have brains shaped by privilege. The children we label as struggling have brains shaped by deprivation. And we pretend these differences are natural when they're actually manufactured by our social and economic system. Understanding this changes how we should think about social policy. Traditional approaches focus on providing equal educational opportunities. But if children are arriving at school with fundamentally different brains, equal opportunities will produce unequal outcomes. Real equality would require equalizing childhood development from birth. It would mean ensuring that all children grow up in cognitively stimulating, emotionally supportive environments regardless of their parents' social class. So instead, we maintain a system that creates neurological castes while pretending it's fair. We tell poor children they can overcome their circumstances through hard work, while systematically undermining their brain development from birth. We measure their performance against children whose brains have been optimized for success, then blame them for failing to measure up. The neuroscience of childhood inequality reveals the cruel lie at the heart of our economic system. We create biological differences through social inequality, then use those differences to justify continued inequality. Okay? It's a self-reinforcing system that manufactures its own legitimacy. Rich kids and poor kids don't just have different opportunities. They have different brains. And until we acknowledge this and address the social conditions that create these differences, we will continue to reproduce inequality across generations while pretending it's natural and fair. The brain scans don't lie. The neural architecture of social class is real, measurable, and profound. What we do with this knowledge will determine whether we continue to manufacture biological castes or finally create the equal opportunity society we claim to believe in. And here's perhaps the most chilling aspect of this research. The scientists found that these brain differences emerge as early as 9-10 years old. By the time children reach 4th grade, their neural architecture is already stamped with their social class position. The inequality machine has already done its work. Think about what this means for the children currently in our schools. The 4th grader struggling with reading comprehension doesn't just need better instruction. Their brain has been shaped by years of chronic stress and limited cognitive stimulation. The 4th grader excelling in advanced math doesn't just have natural talent. Their brain has been optimized by years of enrichment and emotional security. But we treat these differences as individual traits rather than systemic outcomes. We celebrate the achieving child and remediate the struggling child, never acknowledging that we created these differences through our social and economic arrangements. The research shows that by age 10, children from different social classes already have measurably different brain volumes, cortical thickness, and neural connectivity patterns. These differences predict their future academic performance, emotional regulation, and life outcomes with depressing accuracy. This is the childhood inequality machine in operation. It takes human infants with similar potential and systematically creates different types of adults suited for different positions in the economic hierarchy. Rich babies become rich adults, not because they're naturally superior, but because their brains are sculpted by privilege from birth. Okay? And because these differences are neurological rather than just economic, they persist even when circumstances change. The poor child who wins a scholarship to an elite school still carries the neural architecture of poverty. The stress response systems, the threat detection networks, the survival-focused cognitive patterns, these don't disappear when the environment changes. This explains why social mobility has become so rare. It's not enough to change opportunities. You have to change brains. And brain development happens primarily in the first few years of life, when children are most dependent on their family's social and economic resources. The inequality machine ensures its own perpetuation by encoding class differences into the most fundamental aspects of human development. It creates not just economic differences, but cognitive, emotional, and neurological differences that make social mobility increasingly difficult. We are manufacturing separate species of human being, distinguished not by biology, but by the social conditions of their development. And we're doing it systematically, generation after generation, while pretending it's natural selection. Does that make sense, guys?